Okay, so picture this 17th century France.
Right.
All those opulent courts
Mm-hmm.
and all those rigid social structures.
Mm-hmm.
And then imagine being a 15-year-old girl
Oh, wow.
forced into a marriage
Yeah.
with a man 30 years older than you.
Uh,
Not exactly a fairy tale beginning, is
yeah.
it?
No?
Well, this was the reality for Madame d'Aulnoy.
Wow.
And today, we're doing a deep dive into her life. We're looking at this episode of the Noble Blood podcast.
All right.
It's all about Madame d'Aulnoy.
Right.
But we're going to go a little bit deeper than just the biography.
Yeah.
We really want to see how all of this crazy stuff that happened in her life, like the exile and the accusations of treason, maybe even some espionage,
Wow.
how all of that influenced her writing,
Yeah.
and especially her fairy tales.
It's interesting because she had all these really dramatic things going on in her life.
Yeah.
And then she wove them into these tales that people read back then and that we still read now,
Exactly. Yeah.
centuries later.
And she's often called the mother of the fairy tale because of the collections Contes de Fées and Contes Nouveaux.
Right?
Now, you've probably heard of some of these fairy tales with the white cat, but what we really want to look at today is the woman behind the words. What experiences shaped her voice?
Right. And it's a very interesting voice because it's enchanting,
Yeah.
but it's also got this edge to it.
Yeah.
Kind of a subtle critique of the society she lived in.
Okay, so let's rewind a little bit to the beginning.
Okay.
d'Aulnoy was born Marie Catherine the Jumelle de Barneville. And unfortunately, a lot of the details of her early life are a little bit mysterious,
Yeah.
which just makes her even more interesting.
Right.
But what we do know is that her childhood ended
Yeah.
very abruptly with that arranged marriage to François de la Motte. He was the Baron d'Aulnoy. So can you help us understand what those pressures were back then?
Yeah.
What was it like to be a young woman, especially one from a noble family?
Well, one thing you have to keep in mind about marriage among the nobility is
Yeah.
it wasn't about love. It
Right.
definitely was not about personal happiness.
Right.
It was much more strategic. It was about consolidating power, gaining financial stability,
Right.
creating alliances. So young women, like d'Aulnoy, really didn't have a say in these matters.
Okay.
Their destiny was chosen for them.
So d'Aulnoy finds herself in this marriage, basically a pawn in this bigger game of power and influence.
Yeah.
And then things take a dramatic turn.
They do.
Just 3 years into the marriage,
Wow.
she and her mother are accused of plotting against her husband, the Baron.
Yes. And the accusation was serious. They were trying to frame the Baron for speaking out against the king's taxes.
Oh, wow.
And that was a huge no-no because it was lèse-majesté, or treason,
Wow.
punishable by death.
Yeah, that escalated very quickly.
Yeah.
But some historians have suggested that this might have been a way to get out of the marriage.
It's possible.
It wasn't a happy marriage.
Right.
So maybe this was a way to
Yeah.
escape.
Records from that time are a little bit thin.
Okay.
But we do know that the accusations against d'Aulnoy and her mother were eventually dismissed.
Okay.
But there were still consequences.
Oh.
The alleged lovers involved were executed.
Oh, my gosh. And what about d'Aulnoy?
She fled France.
Okay.
She spent about a decade in exile
Wow.
in Spain, England, and Holland. And some scholars believe that she may have even worked as a spy.
A spy.
Yeah,
That's a crazy twist.
it is.
Wow. It makes you wonder what kind of skills she developed during that time.
Yeah,
Constantly having to adapt
right.
and think on her feet.
To new environments
Yeah.
and new situations.
Very different from the French court.
Very.
I wonder how those experiences shaped her worldview,
Yeah.
her understanding of people, and how that all came out in her writing.
Absolutely.
It's almost like she was living a fairy tale in reverse.
Right.
She's escaping this confined life
Yeah.
and embarking on this big adventure.
Mm-hmm.
But she's not just experiencing it passively.
Right.
She's actually writing it down.
Yeah.
So during this period of exile, she wrote 3 pseudo-memoirs
Mm-hmm.
about her adventures.
Yeah.
And they give us these glimpses into the world that she was experiencing. Can you explain what pseudo-memoirs are?
Sure. So pseudo-memoirs were very popular in the 17th century,
Yeah.
and they're kind of this blend of truth and fiction.
Okay.
So they weren't really meant to be
Yeah.
strictly factual autobiographies. They were more carefully crafted narratives
Okay.
that allowed the author to talk about social norms,
Mhm.
to maybe explore some of their own personal experiences, and
Yeah.
to entertain the reader.
So we can't take everything as completely true,
Right.
but they still give us an idea of what Dolnoy was thinking and what she observed.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe even a critique of what she was seeing around her.
Exactly.
What's amazing is that she was able to use this combination of fact and fiction to tell stories
Right.
that captivated people
Yeah.
and set her up for success as a writer.
Absolutely.
Speaking of success, after 16 years, Dolnoy is able to return to Paris.
Wow.
It seems like all is forgiven from her past.
Okay.
And now this is where things get even more interesting.
Okay.
She becomes a celebrated salon hostess.
Oh, wow.
So could you explain what salons were in 17th century France?
Sure. So think of them as these exclusive gatherings,
Okay.
often hosted by very influential women like Aulnoy,
Mm-hmm.
and it's where all the brightest minds of the day would come together.
Okay.
So artists, writers, philosophers, even members of the aristocracy would
Yeah.
come and have these lively discussions about art and literature and current events.
So it wasn't just about tea and gossip.
Oh, no, no, no. Salons were intellectual hubs,
Right.
cultural hubs.
Okay.
This is where reputations were made and broken.
Mm-hmm.
Ideas were debated.
Yeah.
Artistic movements were born.
Wow.
Think of them as the social media of their time.
Right. Okay.
A place to network, share ideas,
Yeah.
be seen.
And it was in this environment, surrounded by all these intellectuals, that Dolnoy really flourished as a writer.
That's so cool.
She published anthologies.
Wow.
She edited poetry. And most importantly, she started writing her own fairy tales.
Right.
And those stories helped to solidify her place in literary history.
Yeah.
But they're not your simple children's tales.
Right.
They're witty.
Yeah.
They're sophisticated. They've got an edge to them.
Yeah.
And they reflected her experiences.
Yeah.
And they questioned the social norms of her time.
Right.
And that's what makes her work so fascinating. On the surface, you've got these enchanting stories full of magic and adventure.
Right.
But if you look a little bit closer,
Yeah.
you see a woman dealing with these really complex themes.
Yeah.
Power, agency,
Right.
and the limitations placed on women
Absolutely.
in her society.
Yes. It's like she's asking us to look beyond what we see on the surface,
Right.
to question all those assumptions and expectations of her time.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of those questions are still relevant, even now,
Yeah.
all these centuries later.
It makes you wonder how much of her own frustration
Yeah.
with those limitations
Right.
went into writing those fairy tales.
Absolutely.
You know, she escaped a forced marriage. She had to make her own way in the world as a woman alone.
Yeah.
Those experiences must have had a big impact on her.
For sure.
And you can see it,
Yeah.
not just in the themes, but in her writing style.
Right.
She's got this energy, this wit
Yeah.
that she probably honed in those salons. That conversational tone,
Yeah.
those sharp observations about people.
It's like you can hear those salon discussions in her writing.
Okay, let's talk about some specifics.
Okay.
One of the Dolnoy's most famous stories is The White Cat. It's a great example of how she blends enchantment
Yeah.
with social commentary.
Right.
Can you give us the basics of the story?
Sure. So it's a classic animal bridegroom story,
Okay.
which Dolnoy seemed to like.
Mm-hmm.
In the story, there's a prince under a curse.
Okay.
He's been turned into a cat.
Mm.
And the only way to break the spell
Yeah.
is for someone to behead him.
Behead him.
Yeah.
That's pretty dark for a fairy tale, isn't it?
Well, this is Dinoy.
That's true.
She wasn't afraid to explore
Right.
the darker side of things, even in her fairy tales.
Yeah.
But it's also a story about transformation,
Okay.
about looking past appearances
Right.
to find true love.
Okay.
And there is a happy ending, of course. But it's a complicated journey to get there with lots of twists and turns, just like Dolnoy's life.
You mentioned the animal bridegroom trope.
Yeah.
It feels like there's something more to it
Right.
than just a fantasy element.
Absolutely. Think about it from the perspective of a woman
Okay.
forced into marriage, basically owned by her husband.
Right.
She might see herself in these stories.
Yeah.
The animal bridegroom, even though he looks like an animal,
Right.
often represents this hidden goodness, this potential for love and freedom
Wow.
that defies society's expectations.
So these tales weren't just escapism.
No.
They were her way to
Yeah.
explore
Yeah.
And maybe even critique
Yeah.
the limitations placed on women in her society.
Exactly.
Like she's planting these little seeds of rebellion and self-determination,
Yeah.
especially for the young women reading these stories.
Right.
And these stories were being read and discussed in those influential salons.
Right.
So who knows what conversations they sparked, what ideas they planted.
Absolutely.
And speaking of things that spark conversations,
That's okay.
there's this real-life event that seems connected to the themes in D'Aulnoy's stories. The attempted murder of her friend, Angelique Nicole Carlier Tiercelin, in 1699.
Oh, wow.
Can you remind us what happened?
So Angelique was accused of hiring assassins to attack her abusive husband.
Oh, my God.
It was a huge scandal in Paris. It really showed how desperate some women were to get out of unhappy marriages.
It sounds like something straight out of one of D'Aulnoy's fairy tales.
It does, doesn't it?
A woman trapped in a bad situation, taking drastic measures to break free.
And remember, D'Aulnoy knew what that was like.
Right.
She had escaped an unhappy marriage herself.
Exactly. So it's easy to see how she would empathize with Angelique.
For sure.
There's another interesting part of this story, right?
Yes.
D'Aulnoy herself was somehow implicated in this plot.
Right.
But she managed to avoid punishment.
It's a mystery that historians are still debating.
Yeah.
Was she actively involved? Did she use her connections to protect herself and Angelique?
Right.
We may never know for sure.
It just adds another layer of mystery to her already fascinating life.
It really makes you wonder where the line is between her real life and the stories she wrote.
Right.
How much of her experiences did she put into her writing, even if it's disguised as a fairy tale?
And speaking of mysteries, how did she do it?
What do you mean?
How did a woman, with her past accusations of treason, exile, maybe even espionage, how did she come back to Paris and be welcomed in those salons?
That is the question, isn't it?
Right.
It really speaks to her resilience, her charisma, maybe even her ability to reinvent herself.
Yeah.
Remember, those salons were more than just parties.
Right.
They were about power and influence. To be accepted there, especially after everything she went through, she must have been really something.
It's like she's living out one of her own fairy tales.
Yeah.
A story of redemption, triumph over adversity.
Right.
But she did it with her intelligence, her storytelling, and maybe even a little bit of cunning.
Maybe so.
And she created this space for herself where she could share her unique perspective.
Right.
Which, as we've seen, was often challenging the way things were, especially advocating for women.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder how people back then reacted to her messages. Did they pick up on what she was really saying?
It's hard to know for sure.
Right.
But one thing's for sure.
Yeah.
Her stories resonated with people back then, and they still resonate with us now. Because they're more than just entertainment.
Right.
They make you think.
Yeah.
They make you question. They make you imagine a world where women have the power to decide their own fate.
It's like she's talking to us across the centuries, encouraging us to see the world through her eyes.
Yeah.
To find our own power.
Right.
And never give up fighting for freedom.
To be ourselves. And that spirit of defiance, that's what makes her so relevant. Even today, you know?
Yeah.
We're still dealing with a lot of the same issues she was writing about.
Gender roles.
Power dynamics.
Power dynamic.
Individual freedom.
Absolutely.
It's amazing how these stories from centuries ago still feel so relevant today.
They really do.
You know, we've talked a lot about the messages in her stories, social commentary, but I want to talk about her writing itself.
Okay.
What makes her different
from other fairy tale writers of her time?
Okay, well, one of the things that I really love about D'Aulnoy's writing is her use of language.
Okay.
She had this way of creating such vivid images with these really elaborate descriptions. You really feel like you're transported to another world.
Yes, and she uses humor, too.
Oh, absolutely.
She's witty and satirical.
Yeah.
She makes fun of court life and people's flaws.
Yeah, she wasn't afraid to poke fun at the establishment.
Right.
Or ruffle a few feathers. But she did it with such a cleverness and charm.
Yeah.
You can't help but love her writing.
It's like she's winking at us, sharing her mischievous view of the world. And those observations about people make her stories so much more than just simple lessons.
Right. She was a master of character development. Her characters are so complex and well-rounded. They really come alive, especially her heroines.
Yep. They're not just damsels in distress. They're smart, resourceful, and often very defiant. They take charge, even when they're facing huge challenges.
Think about the princess in The White Cat. Even though she's turned into an animal, she never loses herself. She uses her intelligence and wit to help the prince. And it shows that true strength comes from within.
Absolutely.
Not from physical power. That's a powerful message.
It is.
Especially for women who are trying to find their voice. In a world that wants to silence them.
And she wasn't afraid to show the tough things that women go through, betrayal, abuse, the pressure from society that traps women in unhappy situations.
And she doesn't sugarcoat it. There are no easy answers or simple solutions. Her stories show how complicated life can be.
The difficult choices women face and the resilience they need to survive.
But even in her darkest stories, there's always a sliver of hope. This feeling that change and redemption are possible. It's like she's saying, even when things are bad, you still have the power to shape your own life, to find strength inside yourself, and create your own happy ending.
That's beautiful.
It is, isn't it?
And it resonates so much. I think one of the reasons we're still so drawn to her work is because it gives us a glimpse into a world that's both familiar and strange. On the one hand, we see those human emotions that we all experience. But then she takes us to this magical realm where anything can happen.
Animals talk. There's magic. The line between what's real and what's not is blurred.
And by doing that, she opens our minds up to new possibilities. She makes us question the limitations in our own world. It's like she's saying, go ahead, dream. Imagine a world where you can break free, where you can create your own happiness.
And that's powerful, isn't it?
It is.
Especially these days when things feel so negative sometimes. Dal Noy reminds us, even when things are tough, there's still room for magic. For hope. For the power of stories.
I love that. I think that's a great place to wrap up.
Okay.
We've gone deep today.
We have.
Into the life and work of Madame Dal Noy.
One of the greats.
We've seen how her life her wit and her spirit all came together in her fairy tales, creating these stories that we're still talking about centuries later.
And if you're interested in learning more, I really encourage you to check out her work, dive into her world, explore those hidden meanings, get to know the woman behind those incredible tales.
And if you enjoyed this deep dive into the world of Madame Dal Noy, be sure to subscribe to The Deep Dive for more fascinating stories that shaped our world.
It's been a pleasure.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep believing in the power of stories.